The roar of the Coast Guard helicopter was deafening, a giant metal bird hovering over the ocean. Below it, bobbing like a toy in the waves, was my beloved fishing boat, the Salty Siren. And standing on its deck, soaked and shivering, was Brenda, our HOA president, a woman everyone secretly called Karen. A rescue swimmer descended, a bright orange blur against the gray sky, and hooked Brenda to a line. Slowly, she ascended, lifted by the chopper, a look of pure terror etched on her face. This was it, Brenda's unforgettable ride, all thanks to her taking my boat without asking. How did she end up in such a precarious situation? The story of Brenda, the Salty Siren, and the surprisingly warm summer that led to this moment is quite a tale. Life in our quiet lakeside community used to be simple. Kids rode bikes, neighbors chatted over fences, and the biggest drama was usually a misplaced package. My name is Alex, and I live here with my golden retriever, Captain. Captain is a big, friendly goofball who loves belly rubs and chasing squirrels. Our house, a cozy two-bedroom with a porch overlooking the lake, has been home for years. I spent my days working as a freelance graphic designer, and my evenings often involved fishing on the Salty Siren. She wasn't fancy, just a sturdy 20-foot fishing boat I'd meticulously cared for, spending countless hours polishing her hull and ensuring her engine purred like a contented cat. Fishing was my escape, my meditation. Out on the water, with the sun on my face and Captain snoozing at my feet, all worries melted away. I often shared my catch with elderly neighbors, a small act of kindness that brought smiles to their faces. Mrs. Gable, who lived 2 doors down, especially loved the fresh trout. She'd always offer me a slice of her famous apple pie in return. Our community thrived on this unwritten code of helpfulness. If someone's car broke down, a neighbor would offer a ride. If a storm knocked out power, we shared generators and hot meals. We were a community, a true collection of friends. Then Brenda moved in. Brenda, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a penchant for rules, arrived like a hurricane in a tailored suit. She bought the largest house on the lake, a sprawling mansion with more bathrooms than anyone could ever need. From the moment she joined the Homeowners Association, things began to change. Our casual gatherings turned into formal meetings with strict agendas. Suddenly, there were new rules for everything: the color of your mailbox, the height of your grass, even the type of flowers you could plant in your front yard. One of her first major initiatives was the Lakeside Beautification Project. It sounded nice enough on paper, but in practice, it meant removing anything she deemed unsightly. This included the charming, slightly overgrown patch of wildflowers old Mr. Henderson had cultivated for years, which provided a vital habitat for local butterflies. Brenda insisted it was messy and an eyesore. I tried to reason with her, explaining the ecological importance, but she just smiled thinly and said, "Rules are rules, Alex. We must maintain property values." The wildflowers were replaced with rows of identical, perfectly manicured shrubs. Mr. Henderson was heartbroken, and many of us felt a pang of sadness. It wasn't long before her attention turned to the lakefront. We had always kept our boats on small, personal docks, or even just pulled up onto the shore near our houses. It was convenient and part of the laid-back charm of our community. Brenda, however, declared it unregulated and a potential hazard. She proposed a new, centralized marina, requiring everyone to move their boats there. The marina was expensive, far from many of our homes, and frankly, unnecessary. But Brenda, with her relentless persuasion and a knack for citing obscure HOA bylaws, managed to push it through. I resisted, arguing that the Salty Siren was too large to easily transport to and from the new marina every time I wanted to fish. I also pointed out that my dock had been there for decades. Her response was a curt, "Compliance is mandatory, Alex. You have 30 days to move your vessel." The new rules felt suffocating. The once vibrant community started to feel tense, people whispering about Brenda's latest decree. The easy camaraderie began to erode, replaced by a cautious politeness. Even Captain seemed to notice the change, looking up at me with his big, soulful eyes as if asking why things felt different. I often found myself retreating to the Salty Siren, seeking solace on the water more than ever before. It was the only place where Brenda's rules couldn't reach me. One sweltering afternoon, as the summer sun beat down relentlessly, a massive storm began to brew on the horizon. Dark, ominous clouds rolled in quickly, and the wind picked up, whipping the lake into a frenzy. I was inside, preparing for the downpour, when I heard a desperate cry from outside. Looking out, I saw Mrs. Gable, her small frame struggling against the fierce wind, trying to secure a tarp over her delicate rose bushes. The wind was so strong it threatened to rip the tarp right out of her hands, and she looked moments away from being knocked off her feet. Without a second thought, I raced outside, Captain barking excitedly at my heels. I dashed out into the whipping wind, the first fat drops of rain already starting to fall, splattering against my face. Captain, surprisingly agile despite his size, bounded ahead, his tail wagging furiously as if this was the most exciting game ever. Mrs. Gable, frail and looking increasingly panicked, stumbled as a particularly strong gust nearly took her off her feet. I reached her in seconds, steadying her with one arm and grabbing hold of the flapping tarp with the other. The wind howled around us, a furious beast trying to snatch everything it could. The roses, Mrs. Gable's pride and joy, looked fragile and vulnerable, their delicate petals already being shredded by the onslaught. "Alex, thank goodness!" she cried, her voice thin against the wind's roar. "I just couldn't get it." "Don't worry, Mrs. Gable, we've got this," I yelled back, pulling the tarp taut. It was a struggle, a wrestling match against an invisible force. The tarp, slick with rain, threatened to slip from my grasp. Captain, sensing the urgency, started nudging at the edges of the tarp with his nose, trying to help in his own way, though mostly just getting in the way. I managed to secure one corner with a heavy garden stone, then wrestled another into place. We worked together, Mrs. Gable holding one side while I stretched and pulled, finally getting the tarp firmly over her precious roses, just as the sky opened up and the rain began to fall in earnest, a deluge that turned the world into a blur. We scrambled back to her porch, soaked to the bone, laughing breathlessly at our victory over the storm. "You're a lifesaver, Alex," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes twinkling. "Come on in, I'll make us some hot cocoa." Inside, as we sipped hot cocoa and Captain snored contentedly at my feet, the warmth of the moment felt like a stark contrast to the chill that Brenda's rules had brought to our community. Mrs. Gable reminded me of the kindness that used to define our neighborhood, a kindness that seemed to be slowly draining away under Brenda's rigid oversight. We talked about how much we missed the old way of life, the spontaneous gatherings, the simple acts of neighborly help that didn't require a permit or a form. The storm outside raged, but inside, a small, comforting fire of shared understanding burned. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sparkling, fresh world. The air smelled of wet earth and clean rain, and the lake shimmered under a bright, clear sky. I stepped outside to survey the damage, mostly just scattered leaves and branches. As I walked towards my boat, the Salty Siren, something immediately felt wrong. My heart gave a jolt. The boat cover, which I always secured tightly, was askew, almost ripped off. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I hurried closer, my steps quickening. When I reached the dock, my blood ran cold. The lines I used to tie, the Salty Siren, to the dock were neatly coiled, but my boat was nowhere to be seen. The space where she should have been bobbing gently was empty, just the placid water reflecting the sky. My mouth went dry. The Salty Siren was gone. I spun around, scanning the lake, hoping she had just drifted a short distance, but there was no sign of her. Captain, sensing my distress, let out a low whine. A wave of disbelief, then a surge of anger, washed over me. Who would take my boat? How could this happen? This wasn't just a boat, it was years of savings, countless memories, and my connection to the peace of the lake. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest, a feeling that something truly awful had just happened. I spent the rest of the morning frantically searching, walking the entire shoreline, peering into every cove and inlet, calling out her name as if she might simply appear. Captain, usually so full of boundless energy, walked solemnly beside me, his nose to the ground, as if he too was searching. I asked every neighbor I saw if they had seen anything unusual. Mr. Jenkins, who was out watering his prize-winning petunias, shook his head. Didn't see a thing, Alex. Heard that storm last night, though. Real nasty one. Mrs. Gable, after I explained what had happened, gasped. Oh, Alex, no. Your beautiful boat. She wrung her hands, genuinely upset for me. No one had seen a thing. It was as if the Salty Siren had simply vanished into thin air. After hours of fruitless searching, with my frustration mounting, I decided there was only one person who might have information, or at least, who needed to know about this major incident in our community, Brenda. Even though I dreaded confronting her, she was still the HOA president, and something this serious had to be reported. I walked up the perfectly manicured path to her imposing front door, Captain lagging a little behind me, sensing the tension. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, steeling myself for the inevitable formality and lack of empathy I knew would follow. Brenda answered the door, her perfectly styled hair still impeccable despite the recent storm. She wore a crisp, tailored pantsuit, looking as if she had just stepped out of a magazine. Her eyes, usually sharp and assessing, widened slightly when she saw my distraught face and Captain's mournful expression. Alex, she said, her voice cool and controlled, what on earth is the matter? Brenda, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, my boat is gone. The Salty Siren vanished from my dock last night. It's been stolen, or worse, something happened in the storm. I've looked everywhere. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face, a brief hesitation, almost like surprise, but it quickly vanished, replaced by her usual composed demeanor. She pursed her lips, a familiar gesture that usually preceded a pronouncement of some new rule or regulation. Your boat, you say? She replied, her tone taking on an almost dismissive edge. Well, Alex, you know the new marina rules. All vessels were to be moved. Perhaps it was relocated for non-compliance. Her words hit me like a slap. Relocated? My stomach clenched. She was implying that this was somehow my fault, that because I hadn't moved it to her precious marina, it deserved to be taken. Relocated by whom, Brenda? I asked, my voice rising slightly. And without my permission? That's theft. Or even worse, what if it sank? What if someone got hurt? Brenda folded her arms, her expression hardening. Alex, there are procedures for these things. Perhaps you should review the HOA Guidelines Section 7b, subsection 4, regarding unauthorized lakeside docking. I'm sure it outlines the necessary steps for property removal. She spoke as if reading from a manual, completely devoid of any human concern. Her cold, bureaucratic response felt like a punch to the gut. It was clear she saw this not as a personal crisis, but as a tedious administrative issue, and one that, in her eyes, I was responsible for creating. The way she so casually suggested it might have been removed or relocated without my knowledge, without any official notice, was infuriating. Brenda, this isn't about bylaws right now. My boat is gone. I need to find it. I exclaimed, my patience wearing thin. Captain let out another low whine, as if agreeing with my exasperation. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Well, I suggest you contact the proper authorities then, Alex. The HOA is not a search and rescue operation. My responsibility is to uphold the rules of this community, and unauthorized watercraft is a clear violation. Her voice was like ice. The dismissive tone, the immediate deflection, the absolute lack of any compassion, it all combined to make my blood boil. It felt like she was deliberately trying to provoke me, to assert her authority, even in the face of a genuine crisis. "Fine," I said, my voice tight with suppressed anger. "I will contact the authorities. And when they find it, and if it turns out someone else took it, there will be consequences." I turned to leave, Captain already tugging at my leash, eager to get away from the oppressive atmosphere of Brenda's perfect house. As I walked away, I heard her perfectly modulated voice call out, "Just remember, Alex, compliance makes for a harmonious community." I marched straight home, my mind racing. Brenda's coldness had only fueled my determination. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the local sheriff's department. I explained the situation, trying to remain calm, detailing the size and features of the Salty Siren, the last time I saw it, and Brenda's strange, almost knowing, response. The deputy on the phone listened patiently, but sounded a little perplexed. "A boat just vanished? In a residential lake?" I assured him it was a large, deep lake, but that it was certainly unusual for a boat to simply disappear. He promised to send an officer out to take a report. While waiting for the officer, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brenda knew more than she was letting on. Her casual mention of relocation, her immediate turn to HOA rules instead of any genuine concern. It gnawed at me. Was it possible she had arranged for my boat to be moved without my knowledge? The thought was outrageous, but with Brenda, nothing was truly out of the question. I remembered her relentless drive to enforce the new marina rules, her unwavering conviction that her way was the only way. Could she have taken matters into her own hands? The idea seemed too extreme, even for Brenda, but the chilling thought lingered in my mind. The officer arrived, a young woman named Officer Riley, who listened intently, taking notes. She asked detailed questions about the boat, the dock, and the exact timing. When I mentioned my conversation with Brenda, Officer Riley's eyebrows subtly rose, but she said nothing, simply nodding. She promised to put out an alert and investigate. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like the Salty Siren returning. Captain seemed to sense my anxiety, staying close, occasionally nudging my hand with his wet nose. The next day dawned, bright and clear again, but my mood remained dark. No word from the sheriff's department, no sign of my boat. The emptiness on the dock was a constant, aching reminder. I felt helpless, angry, and utterly bewildered. Then, around noon, my phone rang. It was Officer Riley. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice serious, "we've received a report of a boat matching your description. It was found adrift quite a distance from your lake, in the larger river that connects to it, several miles downstream. The good news is, it appears to be intact." A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of questions. "Downstream? How did it get there?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Officer Riley replied. "But there's something else. We found someone on board. A woman. She wasn't injured, but she seemed distressed. And she's claiming the boat is hers." My heart pounded. A woman? Claiming it was hers? Only one person in this entire community would have the audacity to take my boat, and then claim ownership, especially after I had just reported it missing. It couldn't be. My mind immediately jumped to Brenda. The idea was so outlandish, so brazen, that it almost defied belief. Yet, a chilling certainty began to form. Could it really be her? Was she actually out there, adrift on my boat? The thought was both horrifying and strangely, grimly, satisfying. An extreme event, indeed. The news from Officer Riley hit me like a physical blow, a rush of disbelief mingled with a strange, dark satisfaction. My boat, adrift miles away, with a distressed woman claiming it as her own? It had to be Brenda. Who else would be so audacious? I could practically see her, flustered and indignant, trying to explain away her presence on the Salty Siren. Officer Riley's voice pulled me back to reality. "We're bringing her in now, Mr. Peterson. Can you come down to the station to identify your boat and speak with her?" "Absolutely," I said, grabbing my keys. Captain, sensing the urgency in my voice, was already at the door, wagging his tail expectantly. The drive to the sheriff's station felt impossibly long. My mind raced, piecing together the events. Brenda's icy demeanor, her casual mention of relocation, her immediate deflection to HOA rules, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She hadn't just known about my boat's disappearance, she had orchestrated it. The thought sent a fresh wave of indignation through me. How dare she? When I arrived at the station, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Officer Riley met me at the counter, her expression grim. "She's in interview room 3, she said, nodding towards a closed door. "Your boat is secured in the impound lot. We'll need you to confirm its identity shortly." "Is it Brenda?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Officer Riley exhaled slowly. "Yes, Mr. Peterson. It's Brenda Maxwell." A mix of shock and a strange kind of vindication washed over me. It was truly unbelievable that she would go to such lengths. As I walked towards the interview room, I tried to compose myself, to prepare for the confrontation. Captain walked dutifully by my side, his normally boisterous energy subdued by the solemn atmosphere. Through the one-way glass, I saw her. Brenda sat at a metal table, her shoulders hunched, her usually pristine blonde hair a tangled mess. Her tailored suit was wrinkled and stained, and she looked utterly defeated, a stark contrast to the imperious woman who usually dictated our lives. She was trying to dab at her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her usual composure completely shattered. The sight was startling. This was a Brenda I had never seen before, stripped of her authority and control. Officer Riley opened the door. "A mess. Maxwell, Mr. Peterson is here." Brenda's head snapped up. Her eyes, red and puffy, widened in alarm when she saw me. A flicker of defiance briefly returned, quickly replaced by a look of sheer desperation. "Alex. What are you doing here?" she stamped, her voice hoarse. "Brenda, that's my boat you were found on," I stated, my voice firm but without the anger I felt just moments before. Seeing her so vulnerable, so clearly distressed, had a strange effect on me. The anger began to recede, replaced by a bewildering mix of pity and concern. She averted her gaze, muttering something unintelligible. Officer Riley stepped in. "Ms. Maxwell, we need you to explain why you were on Mr. Peterson's boat, miles from its mooring, claiming it as your own. This is a serious matter." Brenda finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. I was just trying to help," she stammered, her voice cracking. "The storm. It was going to damage it. And you hadn't moved it to the marina, Alex. It was an unauthorized vessel. So you decided to help by taking my boat without permission?" I asked, incredulous. "I wasn't taking it. I was relocating it," she insisted, clinging to her bureaucratic language even in her distress. "I figured I could pilot it to the new marina, secure it there, and then inform you. For the good of the community." Officer Riley leaned forward. "Ms. Maxwell, that's called grand theft. And operating a vessel without the owner's permission, especially in stormy conditions, is extremely dangerous." Brenda flinched. "I didn't think it would be so difficult," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I just wanted to set an example. To show everyone that the rules apply to everyone. I thought I could manage it. I've sailed before, on my father's yacht years ago. I thought I remembered." She recounted her story in a shaky voice. The night of the storm, she had been pacing, agitated by my boat still being on my dock, a blatant defiance of her new marina rule. She had convinced herself that the storm was an opportunity to fix the problem, to move the Salty Siren herself and finally enforce compliance. In her mind, she was performing a public service. She snuck out, untied the boat, and somehow, clumsily, started the engine. She had intended to drive it to the new marina, but the storm, much stronger than she anticipated, quickly overwhelmed her. The boat was pushed further and further downstream, out of the lake, into the connecting river. She had no idea how to navigate in such conditions, the strong currents and wind had taken over. She had become disoriented, frightened, and completely lost. She clung to the wheel, terrified, as the Salty Siren became a runaway vessel, carrying her far from the familiar shores of our community. When the Coast Guard found her, she was a wreck, soaked, shivering, and utterly humiliated. Listening to her confession, the anger that had been simmering within me completely dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of sadness. It wasn't just about my boat, it was about Brenda. Her desperate need for control, her misguided belief that rules were always the answer, had led her to this absurd and dangerous situation. She wasn't malicious, not truly. She was just deeply, desperately, wrong-headed in her approach. Her life seemed to be completely intertwined with the HOA, as if upholding its bylaws was her entire purpose. It made me wonder what void in her life she was trying to fill with all this control and authority. Officer Riley watched me, perhaps expecting me to demand justice, to press charges. But looking at Brenda, so utterly broken, I couldn't. What would it achieve? More rules, more conflict. My boat was found, intact. And Brenda had clearly suffered a terrifying ordeal. "Officer," I said, taking a deep breath. I don't want to press charges." Brenda's head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. Officer Riley looked surprised. "Mr. Peterson, she illegally took your property, endangered herself, and caused a significant search and rescue operation." "I understand that, officer," I replied, "but my boat is safe. And I think Brenda has learned a very harsh lesson already tonight. I want her to understand the impact of her actions, not just in terms of rules, but in terms of community and trust." Brenda stared at me, a silent, bewildered expression on her face. The mask of the HOA president had completely fallen away, revealing a surprisingly fragile woman beneath. Officer Riley, after a moment, nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Peterson. We'll still need a formal statement from you, and she'll have to pay for the Coast Guard's expenses, and any damage to your boat, of course. But if you don't wish to press criminal charges, we can proceed with a formal warning and a report to the HOA board." I agreed, relieved. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about something bigger. Before I left, I looked at Brenda again. "Brenda," I said, "community isn't just about rules. It's about looking out for each other, about kindness and understanding. It's about asking for help when you need it, and offering it when someone else does. If you had just asked, I would have helped you move it. That's what neighbors do." Brenda said nothing, just looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps even shame, in their depths. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly speechless. Captain nudged my hand, as if urging me to leave. As I turned to walk out of the interview room, I felt a strange sense of closure. The crisis was averted, my boat was safe, and Brenda, for the first time, seemed to be truly confronted with the consequences of her rigid worldview. I knew this wouldn't instantly transform her, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was a start. The next chapter of our community life, I hoped, would be one of rebuilding, not just of docks and rules, but of trust and empathy. However, what I didn't know then was that Brenda's ordeal, far from being a singular event, was merely the beginning of a far more intricate and bizarre series of events that would further test the fabric of our community and reveal even deeper layers of Brenda's strange character. News of Brenda's Coast Guard rescue and the circumstances surrounding it spread through our community like wildfire, faster than any official HOA newsletter. Whispers turned into open discussions at the community park, on dog walks, and over garden fences. Most people were bewildered, some were amused, and a few, like me, felt a strange mix of sympathy and bewilderment. Brenda, the unyielding enforcer of rules, had been caught breaking the biggest one of all, stealing. Yet, because I hadn't pressed charges, the official narrative remained somewhat vague, allowing for speculation. Some even suggested I was a saint for my leniency, which made me uncomfortable. I just wanted peace, not a medal. Life returned to a semblance of normal, but a new, unspoken dynamic hung in the air. Brenda, once omnipresent and imposing, became noticeably absent from community events. She no longer patrolled the streets in her golf cart, scrutinizing lawn heights or mailbox colors. Her perfect house seemed quieter, its blinds often drawn. It was clear the incident had deeply shaken her, perhaps even shamed her. This period of quiet felt strange, almost unsettling, after years of her constant presence. Some neighbors openly rejoiced, enjoying the sudden freedom from her meticulous scrutiny. Others, however, felt a strange void, as if a vital, albeit irritating, part of the community fabric was missing. One afternoon, a few weeks after the incident, I was out on the Salty Siren, enjoying the tranquility of the lake. Captain was curled up on the deck, enjoying the gentle rocking motion, his ears occasionally twitching at the sound of a distant bird. The engine purred reliably, a comforting sound after the recent ordeal. I cast my line, relishing the simple rhythm of fishing. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. It was a beautiful day, serene and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed us. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Gable. "Alex, dear, could you come over when you have a moment? It's about Brenda. She's unwell." My peaceful afternoon was instantly shattered. Unwell? My mind immediately conjured images of her looking even more distraught than she had at the sheriff's station. A knot formed in my stomach. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore a neighbor in distress, even if that neighbor was Brenda. I reeled in my line, started the engine, and headed back to shore, Captain looking up at me with a questioning glance. When I arrived at Mrs. Gable's house, she met me at the door, her face etched with concern. "She just seems so lost, Alex. I went to check on her, and she wasn't making any sense. She said she saw a giant octopus in her swimming pool." A giant octopus in her swimming pool? That sounded less unwell and more like a hallucination. My eyebrows shot up. "An octopus, Mrs. Gable?" "Yes, dear. And she was talking about rules for sea creatures," Mrs. Gable whispered, wide-eyed. "I don't know what to do." We walked over to Brenda's house together. The blinds were still drawn, giving the large house a forlorn appearance. I rang the doorbell, and after a long moment, Brenda answered. She looked even worse than at the station. Her hair was still disheveled, her clothes rumpled, and her eyes had a vacant, distant look. She seemed to have lost weight. But what truly struck me was the intense, almost manic, gleam in her eyes. It was a look of someone consumed by something invisible to others. "Brenda, are you all right?" I asked gently. She blinked, then her eyes focused on me, a flicker of recognition. "Alex. Oh, thank goodness you're here. The Kraken is trying to build an unauthorized coral reef in my infinity pool. It's a clear violation of subsection 9C, Aquatic Habitat Regulations for Non-Indigenous Species." She gestured wildly towards her backyard, her voice rising in urgency. I exchanged a bewildered glance with Mrs. Gable. Brenda was clearly experiencing some sort of break from reality. The Kraken and aquatic habitat regulations for non-indigenous species were new additions to her lexicon of rules, far beyond anything even she had ever dreamed up for the HOA. This was beyond the scope of anything I was prepared for. It was heartbreaking to see her like this. The woman who had once prided herself on being so perfectly composed was now utterly unmoored, lost in a world of her own creation. It was an extreme event, but not in the way I ever would have expected. Over the next few days, Brenda's condition worsened. She began wandering the neighborhood, muttering to herself about rogue dolphins vandalizing mailboxes and mermaids attempting to squat in vacant properties. She'd carry a tattered copy of what looked like a real HOA bylaw book, occasionally consulting it, then furiously scribbling in a small notebook, seemingly drafting new rules for her imaginary aquatic residents. Neighbors became increasingly concerned, unsure how to react to the once feared Brenda now acting so erratically. Some tried to engage her gently, asking if she needed help, but she would just stare at them blankly, or launch into a convoluted explanation of why the community pond needed stricter regulations for migrating fish species. The HOA board, now without its driving force, was in disarray. There were no more rigid meetings, no more new decrees. It was a strange kind of peace, but one tinged with sadness and worry for Brenda. Mrs. Gable and I, along with a few other sympathetic neighbors, tried to figure out a way to get her help. We called her family, but they lived far away and seemed reluctant to get involved, vaguely mentioning Brenda's eccentricities. It became clear that we, her community, were her only immediate support system, despite her previous actions. One evening, I received a frantic call from Mr. Henderson. "Alex, you have to come quickly. Brenda is trying to evict the ducks from the lake. She's got a megaphone." I rushed to the lakefront. Sure enough, there was Brenda, standing at the edge of the water, holding a megaphone, yelling at a bewildered flock of ducks. Section 4B, Waterfowl Loitering Protocol. You are in violation. Disperse immediately, or face punitive measures. The ducks, seemingly unfazed, continued to preen their feathers, occasionally honking in what sounded like amusement. It was a bizarre and comical sight, but also deeply unsettling. This wasn't just eccentric behavior, it was a cry for help. As I approached, a particularly large male duck waddled confidently towards Brenda, quacking loudly. Brenda, for a moment, seemed flustered, her grand pronouncements interrupted by a defiant bird. She tried to shoo it away with her free hand, but the duck held its ground, quacking even louder, as if arguing with her. This small, feathered creature seemed to be the only one bold enough to openly defy Brenda, and it was doing so with remarkable enthusiasm. Brenda's face contorted in frustration. "You're a rogue element." A clear disruption of the natural order, she shrieked into the megaphone, aiming it directly at the duck. The duck simply flapped its wings, unimpressed. This was a new low, even for Brenda, and it was clear that professional help was urgently needed. The community's previous disdain for her had been replaced by genuine concern. This extreme behavior had pushed everyone past their grievances, focusing instead on her well-being. Watching Brenda shout at a duck through a megaphone, completely lost in her own distorted reality, was a truly surreal experience. The duck, bless its feathery defiance, seemed to embody the collective exasperation of the community. It was a clear sign that Brenda's situation had escalated beyond simple eccentricity. This was no longer just about HOA rules or my boat, it was about her mental well-being, and it was deeply distressing to witness. I knew, without a doubt, that we had to act. "Brenda," I said, approaching her slowly, trying to keep my voice calm and soothing. "Brenda, let's go inside. It's getting late." She spun around, megaphone still clutched in her hand. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around, as if searching for another rule violator in the shimmering lake water. But the migratory patterns. They're not adhering to the designated flight paths. It's chaos, Alex, utter chaos. Mr. Henderson, usually so mild-mannered, was looking genuinely distraught. She's been at it for hours, he whispered to me. I even tried offering her some birdseed, but she said it was contraband for unauthorized waterfowl. It was evident that reasoning with her was futile. I gently took the megaphone from her hand, and surprisingly, she let it go without a struggle, her gaze already fixed on something new in the distance, a discarded plastic bottle floating near the shore. Plastic pollution, she declared with renewed vigor. A clear violation of Water Quality and Debris Management Protocol, Section 12F. Mrs. Gable, who had arrived just after me, stepped forward and gently put an arm around Brenda's shoulders. Brenda, dear, let's get you some tea. You look exhausted. To our surprise, Brenda leaned into Mrs. Gable's touch, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. We managed to guide her back to her house, a slow, gentle procession. She continued to mumble about aquatic bylaws and rogue fish, but her voice was softer now, the frantic energy starting to wane. Inside her quiet house, which now felt less imposing and more like a lonely monument to strict order, we sat Brenda down. Mrs. Gable brewed some calming herbal tea, while I made a difficult call. I called Brenda's out-of-state family again, this time explaining the severity of the situation in no uncertain terms. I described the octopus, the mermaids, the duck eviction, everything. I emphasized that she was a danger to herself and clearly needed professional help. This time, thankfully, they listened. They promised to arrange for a crisis intervention team to visit her as soon as possible. It was a huge relief, a weight lifted from our shoulders, yet it also felt incredibly sad to see Brenda, once so formidable, reduced to such a fragile state. The next day, a quiet, unmarked van arrived at Brenda's house. A team of mental health professionals, kind and compassionate, spent hours talking with her. We, the neighbors who had gathered discreetly, watched from a distance, our hearts heavy with concern. Eventually, Brenda, surprisingly cooperative though still visibly distressed, agreed to go with them for assessment and care. As she left, she looked back at her house, a faraway look in her eyes, as if she was seeing her kingdom crumble. It was a quiet departure for a woman who had once made such a loud impact on our community. Her absence, though necessary, left a palpable void. The HOA meetings remained unscheduled, the rules largely unenforced, and the community found itself in an odd state of limbo. Weeks turned into a month. Brenda was receiving professional help, and we heard, through her family, that she was slowly, painstakingly, improving. The kraken and mermaids were fading, replaced by a fragile return to reality. During this time, our community began to heal in its own way. Without Brenda's iron grip, neighbors started talking again, planning informal potlucks, and helping each other with small tasks without fear of violating an obscure bylaw. Mr. Henderson replanted his wildflowers, and they bloomed beautifully, a vibrant splash of color against the neatly trimmed lawns. It felt like a spring after a long, cold winter. We realized how much we had missed the simple, unforced camaraderie. Then, just as a sense of normalcy began to settle, another odd event occurred. A series of strange packages started appearing on doorsteps throughout the community. They were wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. The first one was left on my porch. Inside, nestled on a bed of shredded paper, was a perfectly polished, antique brass compass. Attached was a small, handwritten note that simply read, "For finding your way. B." My heart gave a jolt. B. It had to be Brenda. But why a compass? And why now? I showed it to Mrs. Gable, who received a package containing a small, beautifully carved wooden bird, along with a similar note, "For finding your song. B." Other neighbors started reporting similar mysterious gifts, a miniature telescope, a delicate hourglass, a small, intricate globe. Each item seemed to be a symbolic gesture, a quiet message, though its meaning was elusive. It was a far cry from the stern, rule-enforcing Brenda we knew. This was a new, softer, more introspective Brenda, communicating in a way we never would have imagined. These small, thoughtful gifts were an unexpected extreme event, a sign that Brenda was not only recovering but perhaps undergoing a profound internal transformation, shedding her rigid past. The strangest package of all arrived at the new HOA office, which had mostly sat dormant since Brenda's departure. It wasn't a gift, but a large, intricately designed mosaic, crafted from hundreds of tiny, brightly colored pieces of glass. When assembled, it depicted our community lake, but in a fantastical way, with vibrant, imaginary creatures swimming among happy, laughing people. And at the center of it all, floating peacefully, was a detailed representation of the Salty Siren, my boat, her sails unfurled, navigating smoothly through the colorful waters. At the bottom, subtly integrated into the design, were the letters BM. It was a stunning piece of art, clearly made with immense care and effort, but its message was perplexing. Was this an apology? A new vision for the community? Or something entirely different? The mystery of these gifts, and the mosaic in particular, kept us all wondering what Brenda was truly trying to say, and what her return, whenever that might be, would bring. Chapter 6. The mosaic arrived at the HOA office, a stunning, vibrant explosion of color that seemed to hum with a quiet energy. It depicted our lake not as a regulated body of water, but as a mythical realm, brimming with fantastical creatures and a sense of boundless joy. The Salty Siren, my boat, was at its heart, depicted as a vessel of exploration and wonder, rather than just a fishing boat. The initials, BM, subtly woven into the design left no doubt as to its creator. It was an astonishing work, but also deeply puzzling. Was this Brenda's way of apologizing? Or was it a new manifestation of her peculiar fixation? The mysterious gifts, the compass, the wooden bird, the telescope, continued to appear on doorsteps for a few more days, each one a silent, symbolic offering from the reclusive Brenda. Neighbors were abuzz, trying to decipher their meaning. They sparked a renewed sense of connection within the community, as people gathered to share their gifts and theories. The air was filled with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. Everyone wondered, what would Brenda's return truly entail? Then, one sunny morning, an official, crisp white envelope arrived in every mailbox in the community. It wasn't a standard HOA notice, nor did it bear Brenda's usual intimidating font. The paper felt thick, expensive, and carried a faint, sweet scent of lilies. Inside, a single sheet of paper, elegantly embossed, contained an invitation. It read, "You are cordially invited to a community lakeside gala and inaugural boat parade. Date, this Saturday. Time, sunset. Location, the new marina. Special guest, the Salty Siren, and her captain. Dress code, whatever brings you joy. Come, celebrate the spirit of our remarkable community." Brenda Maxwell, a gala? A boat parade? At the new marina? And I was a special guest. The transformation was unbelievable. The community was stunned. Brenda, the queen of rules and regulations, was hosting a celebration of joy and spontaneity. People were cautiously optimistic, yet a lingering sense of unease remained. Had she truly changed? Or was this another elaborate, rule-bound event in disguise? The Saturday of the gala arrived, a perfect evening with a sky painted in hues of orange and pink. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, people started gathering at the marina. It was truly a sight to behold. The marina, usually an empty, sterile concrete structure, was transformed. Colorful lanterns hung from every beam, string lights twinkled along the docks, and soft music drifted across the water. Tables laden with food and drinks were set up, and the air buzzed with laughter and chatter. This was the vibrant community I remembered, but even more so, filled with a renewed sense of lightness. Then, a hush fell over the crowd as a sleek, perfectly restored, the Salty Siren, glided into view. She wasn't just polished, she sparkled, her brass fittings gleaming, her wood polished to a deep luster. And at the helm, standing tall and regal, was Brenda. She wasn't wearing a tailored suit, but a flowing, elegant dress made of shimmering blue fabric, like the lake itself. Her hair, though still perfectly coiffed, was softer, adorned with a single, delicate flower. She looked completely different, not just in appearance, but in her entire demeanor. Her eyes held a newfound warmth, and a genuine, gentle smile played on her lips. As she brought the Salty Siren to a smooth stop at the main dock, the crowd erupted in applause. Brenda stepped off the boat, and for the first time, she truly looked at each of us, her gaze lingering on individuals she had once strictly governed. Her eyes met mine, and she gave a small, genuine nod, a silent acknowledgement of our shared past and her profound apology. She then walked to a microphone, a slight tremor in her hands. "Neighbors, friends," she began, her voice soft but clear, completely devoid of its usual clipped authority. "I stand before you tonight a changed woman. My journey has been unexpected. I spent so long believing that rules, and rules alone, could create order and happiness. I lost sight of what truly matters: connection, kindness, and the inherent joy of a community that supports each other." She paused, taking a deep breath. "My time away has taught me a great deal. I now understand that true order comes from understanding and empathy, not from rigid enforcement. The gifts I sent were my way of trying to communicate this newfound understanding. The compass, for finding your own true north; the bird, for the freedom to express yourself; the mosaic, a vision of what our community can be when we celebrate our individuality within our shared space." Then, she looked directly at me. "Alex, your boat was a symbol of my misguided efforts. Taking it was a terrible mistake, and I am deeply sorry. You showed me immense grace and understanding, and for that, I am eternally grateful." She turned back to the crowd. "From this day forward, the HOA will be different. It will be a place for collaboration, for supporting our neighbors, for fostering the very best of what makes this community special. No more arbitrary rules, no more stifling regulations. Just a shared vision of kindness." The crowd cheered, a genuine, heartfelt roar of approval. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from our collective shoulders. The rigid, rule-obsessed Brenda was gone, replaced by a Brenda who understood the true meaning of community. As the boat parade began, a delightful spectacle of decorated vessels, large and small, gliding across the illuminated lake, I watched the Salty Siren lead the way, its sails glowing in the twilight. Brenda stood at the helm, no longer a Karen, but a leader reborn, steering our community towards a brighter, more empathetic future. It was a wild, unexpected ending to Brenda's reign, one that promised a future of kindness, collaboration, and countless untold stories on our beloved lake.